In a world where most people watch movies and then forget about them, these brave heroes join forces to watch them again and then talk about them. Join them in their epic journey as they go back in time, a decade and beyond, to revisit and break down films from a vast array of genres. Do these movies hold up over time? Are they classics? Find out on Retro Movie Roundtable. Starring your hosts, Brian Fry, Chad Robinson, Dustin Melbardis, Lizzie Haynes, and Russell Guest. Coming now to headphones in your ears.
Welcome all you lords, ladies, and knights to the Retro Movie Roundtable. Welcome to the show where we watch movies and then talk about them. I am your host, Russell Guest, and joining me today is my good friend and co-host, Mr. Chad Robinson. How you doing, sir?
Doing well. Excited to talk about some movies tonight.
I'm excited. I get to meet a friend of a friend and a first-time guest here. Welcome from the great city of St. Louis and from the Franchise Paradiso Podcast. Special guest, Mr. Heath Lynch. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
All right. Tell us a little bit about the Franchise Paradiso Podcast.
We moan about the fact that there's not really that much fun, new, original, independent cinema being made, even though we know that's not actually the case. There is, but we like to complain about it all the same. And how it seems that most major movies these days in big studios are just pushing franchises. So our whole shtick is we revel in what we are force-fed. And we dissect and analyze franchise films. We do different seasons. Our first season was about horror franchises. And each episode is a different theme. We did best killers, best final girls, best scores, best atmospheres and settings, best iconography, performances, all the fun things that you would think about when you think of horror. Right now, we're on season 2. We're doing superheroes and comic book adaptations, graphic novel adaptations. It's just a fun thing where we can talk about all our favorite franchises. As much as I love talking about The Hustler, sometimes it's also just fun to talk about Batman. So that's what we do. And our main shtick is that we rank things. At the end of every episode, we rank those things. So for best horror, when I said best killer, best final girl, at the end of each one of those episodes, we do a top 10 ranking collectively of what everyone on the podcast thinks are the best of those things. And it can get quite contentious because we have to agree on a definitive ranking, and trying to argue and nominate different options, it can get kind of fun.
Well, you have gotten 2 subscribers just now because I know Chad's ears perked up when you said season 1 was on the horror franchise, and you said you like to rank things, and that's my language right there. So
Yep.
We are definitely going to check out the Franchise Paradiso Podcast. Just to break the ice here, Heath, let's get to know you a little better. Name a movie that changed and transformed the way that you view one of the actors in it for the better.
There wasn't really a movie that like defined me that at least I can in my memory recall saying like, oh, this is how I remember someone differently. The more accurate way to answer that question would be to describe a movie that impacted me, wherein because of that movie, I just noticed the performer more. And that would be Saving Private Ryan. Saving Private Ryan was a defining film for me. Before that, I liked film. It was all entertainment and it was fun. You know, there was maybe the occasional film where I was just like, oh, there's something like special here. But like they never struck me until I saw Saving Private Ryan, and that, you know, opening 20-minute on Omaha Beach that just floors you. That just redefined what movies could do, the types of stories they could tell, and their epic and grand scale. And because of that, Tom Hanks in particular, but really the whole company, just seeing all those actors in a different lens. Like before that, I'd seen Tom Hanks, and you know, my mom was a big rom-com person, so Sleepless in Seattle, that was a thing. You know, even still, Forrest Gump, but like those were different types of performances to me. Even Forrest Gump, though it was more dramatic, and he got an Oscar for it. It had comedic elements to it, whereas for me, Saving Private Ryan was not that, not in the slightest. It completely changed the oeuvre around Tom Hanks to me and what he could do and what he could represent, but not even just him, but everyone else in that squad. And it was just seeing this chemistry of that. That was the first time I really remember being struck by what an ensemble performance could look like, having such a variety of different types of characters. And even if some of them were stereotypical archetypes, how they could be elevated. All of that combined made me just appreciate character, made me appreciate performances and film so much more. So Saving Private Ryan, Tom Hanks would definitely be the defining film, the defining performance that opened my eyes to, holy crap, movies are more than just entertainment. They are art. Nothing's ever been the same ever since.
Well, that's a good one there. I'm not Mr. War movie, but I think that one's, if not the top, but near the very tippy top for my war movie experiences as well. So hard one to see sometimes through that opening scene, but powerful. Chad, how about you? What's an acting performance that made you change how you view an actor for the better?
So I think context is important. I was born in 1984. So in 7th grade, Titanic came out, and our school took us all to see Titanic. And all the girls in my class swooned over Leonardo DiCaprio. And I swore pretty much a blood oath of, I hate this guy. He's getting all this attention. Hate this dude. It's really not an acting tour de force of Leonardo DiCaprio. And he's in a couple other movies around this time. He has Man in the Iron Mask, which really isn't
The
very
Beach.
impressive. Right. But Catch Me If You Can. We're going to go with Tom Hanks again. Tom Hanks magic. But Catch Me If You Can started to turn
Or
it
Spielberg
around for
magic.
me. Of, okay, this guy's not as bad as I thought. Maybe I'm just putting a little too much jealousy into my hatred of him and the attention he's getting from his never-ending stream of cannot age past 26-year-olds. So I really liked him in Catch Me If You Can, and he's grown on me since.
It's really interesting you said that, Chad. I fought the fight harder than you did for the same reasons. I remember DiCaprio. It was Shutter Island for me that made me come around to saying, like,
That's
you know
a
what?
great one.
He's pretty good. You know what? I'm going to stop saying I hate Leonardo DiCaprio. And I had already gone through Departed and Blood Diamond, and I let go of that. I'm going to go even more, perhaps, along those same lines. McConaughey is mine. Matthew McConaughey.
That's fair.
We Are Marshall is the movie that got my attention a little bit. And that was off of, so he had done Sahara, which is kind of a goofy comedy. He had done, Tiptoes, which by all accounts is terrible. How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days is leading up to their failure to launch. These are not great movies. And he even does Fool's Gold immediately following it. But I mean, after that,
Terrible movie.
I know, but he starts to turn the corner with We Are Marshall. There's The Lincoln Lawyer, there's Mud, Dallas Buyers Club, Wolf on Wall Street, Interstellar. I mean, total heavyweight, Academy Award winner for Best Actor and stuff like that. So I never saw that in the cards for him from the guy who was in things like The Wedding Planner or It's Not What You
Ghosts
Think.
of Girlfriends Past.
Thank you.
I mean, there's a reason why his all right catchphrase is stuck with him, because that persona, even in the archetype of that one line of dialogue, kind of defined him for the first 2.5 decades of his career, So it's not wrong to think that he would never have made it to the degree he did. Most people didn't think he would have. So
I'm going to ask you another one here. Keith, what's the last movie you saw? Does not have to be in theaters. Just last movie.
I just today rewatched Palm Springs, which is I think my favorite time loop movie. I'm sure a lot of people would say that's blasphemous and that it should be Groundhog Day, but I love Palm Spring. I think what it's doing is tremendous with the way the story itself on the surface conveys just a silly comedy about being a time loop, but in actuality, it's presented to me, at least to me, it feels like much more a story about relationship commitment and the idea of marriage and how the everyday, day in and day out, might feel like a mundane grind, but it's those special moments that make it unique to each of us. And to have a comedy of that nature that actually has some heart and themes with it that truly sing with some really great comedic performances, and the movie makes me laugh my butt off, and in such a svelte runtime, it never overstays its welcome. It's endlessly rewatchable, really good. I love it.
I definitely want to see that movie. I'm aware of it. This hit probably just right before the pandemic stuff started going down, so I never got around to it, but I certainly want to see it. I love Andy Samberg and I don't know, anybody from that era of Saturday Night Live. That was just my era.
Great supporting performance from J.K. Simmons too.
He's always great.
I've never heard of this, but I'm excited for it. I love some time loop movies.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
it's a terrific time loop movie. One of the best things to come out of the pandemic. There was even a small undercurrent of people that very seriously thought it should have been nominated for Oscars. I would have loved that. I don't think it quite met that bar, but I would have been beside myself with joy if that had happened.
It had a shot with because it's 2020 if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
like that just was a funny year for
If
films.
there was a year to make it happen, that would have been the year.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well then, Chad, how about you? What's the last movie you saw?
I watched a movie that has no chance of being nominated for an Oscar, and that is Deadstream. It is 2022, 2023, somewhere around that. Found footage. It's a YouTuber that's trying to redeem himself for some stupid prank that he pulled. It's like a Logan Paul-esque
You don't
type
sound happy.
situation. He goes into a haunted house, and haunted house actually closer to Evil Dead style shenanigans go on. I don't think they had a ton of budget. I would have liked to have seen had they had a higher budget. It was close. It's one of those movies where I fell on the this dude's too annoying of a YouTuber type personality. And if you fall into that category, you're probably gonna have a rougher time.
Okay, a rare miss from the horror genre.
I do love found footage.
And mine, I think I've said this one a couple of times this year, but it is in heavy rotation right now. It is just over Heath's right shoulder on his back wall. He has a poster of this one right now, and that is E.T. It has been my son's go-to film right now. He is absolutely in love with it and wants to watch it with whoever in the family, whatever friend he can get a hold of. I mean, he absolutely loves it. So he quotes it. I'm on vacation now, and he was out there on the beach acting like he was getting away from E.T., jumping into the waves. I don't know. Like, he's just into this movie so much. And I already rated this movie a long time ago with you, Chad. And I think I gave it a 5 then, too. But I somehow have continued to love this movie even more and more through watching my little man love this movie. It's great.
That's wonderful.
I completely agree.
Well, today, Chad, what are we going to be covering?
1961's The Hustler.
All right. This movie is not about a dirty magazine. It is not about a 1970s disco song. It is a billiard movie, which we don't have many of here. So this movie stars Paul Newman, Piper Laurie, George C. Scott, Jackie Gleason, and Myron McCormick. The year is 1961 that it comes out. It's budgeted for $2.1 million. It grosses $7.6 million. Good return domestically. Places at 20th on the box office that year. It comes in behind The Misfits and ahead of A Pocketful of Miracles. The number one movie from 1961 was 101 Dalmatians. IMDb gives The Hustler an 8.0. The critics of Rotten Tomatoes really love this movie. It's a 94%, and the audience score is right there with them at 93%. It is an Academy Award winner twice for Best Art Direction Black and White and Best Cinematography Black and White. It is an Academy Award nominee 6 times. In addition to that, for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor for Paul Newman, Best Actress for Piper Laurie, Best Supporting Actor, George C. Scott, Best Screenplay. And I was sitting there going like, wow, this is a heavy year. So some of these things that they lost to, West Side Story, that's an amazing movie. Sophia Loren for Two Women, I haven't seen that one. Lost Judgment at Nuremberg, I have seen. This is a tough year of movies to go up against. So the fact that it's coming away with 2 out of 8 nominees is not bad. It is a Golden Globe nominee for 3. Doesn't win, but it gets Best Actor nominee for Paul Newman and Best Supporting Actor Jackie Gleason. Most Promising Newcomer George C. Scott. It is a BAFTA winner for Best Film and Best Foreign Actor for Paul Newman. It got nominated as well there. The BAFTAs for Best Foreign Actress. It's a Directors Guild of America Award nominee for Outstanding Directorial Achievement. Writers Guild of America Awards winner for Best Written Drama. A Laurel winner for 3 of them for Best Top Male Dramatic Performance for Newman. And a Top Male Supporting Performance for Jackie Gleason. Top Cinematography also for Black and White as well. And AFI gives us the prestigious distinction of 2008 when they ranked the top 10 sports movies. They ranked this one number 6. So it was also nominated for top 100 movies. Top 100 Thrills nominated as well. Didn't make either of those lists. And it was also nominated for Best Villains for Burt Gordon as well. It is also nominated, didn't make it for their AFI's Best Movie Quotes for Eddie, You're a Born Loser. So a lot of nominations here, but certainly number 6 all-time sports movie here. This is coming in with a lot of clout, a lot of awards, a lot of nominations. Critics love it. Heath, had you seen The Hustler before? If so, what was your background with it?
I have seen this before. One other caveat that's probably worth mentioning, although it wasn't directly in that awards contention segment, but as to why I saw it and why probably other people might have seen it or have heard of it is because this is actually part of a series based off a novel. Another movie was later made that's probably well known by today's standards because it's a Martin Scorsese movie, and that's The Color of Money. I guess by today's standards, we'd call it a legacy sequel, but that wasn't really a term at the time in the 80s. The Color of Money follows still Paul Newman as Fast Eddie Felson, legendary pool shark billiards player. It was just doing a kind of a Scorsese run. Watched The Color of Money, absolutely loved it, and discovered that this was actually a sequel to The Hustler. I felt ashamed that I didn't find that out in the first place, so I went back and watched The Hustler, and I loved it. And then I was like, now I just want to go watch The Color of Money again. So I just in succession, just ping pong back and forth between those two movies. Yeah, I absolutely love it.
Wow. And you did The Color of Money first. What was it like to then go back? Did it change things? Did it take things away for you? Or was this like basically it's a prequel for you, even though it wasn't made in that order? How's it taking it in reverse order?
To me, it was very interesting because I find the two movies to be very different in the tone and the way they're shot. A lot of that is to do with Scorsese taking the helm the second time around. I wouldn't say so much due to the performances because I think Newman is knocking it out of the park regardless, but he's asked to portray Fast Eddie in two very distinctly different ways. Yeah, I just found it as very interesting, mirrored character study. A man, brash, young, full of ego, wanting to make a name for himself. And then you get The Color of Money, where it's the man at the end of his rope. His time has come and gone. And I don't want to spoil it too much in case anyone hasn't seen this over 40-year-old movie. But basically, the movie has the option to go the traditional route of, I'll just train the new generation, the young gun, who happens to be Tom Cruise, which is hilarious. But they go the route of, no, I still got my kicks and I'm going to go out for one last wild ride. And so I think as a duology, these two movies say a lot about our central character, Fast Eddie. And I found each of them to be informative of the other, regardless of what order I think anyone would watch them. To me, the prequel effect didn't really hinder anything other than, actually, I wouldn't even say anything because they comprise two very different parts of his life and very different supporting characters around him that tell very different stories. To me, it just felt like a continuation, even though I saw them in reverse order.
Yeah. Do you feel like the 1961 Hustler movie is holding up in today's times?
That's tough. If I was to be blunt, I don't know if modern audiences would care as much about The Hustler as they would about The Color of Money. If you just put the two films in front of Gen Z or something, or maybe a younger millennial, and just said, hey, here's this film from the early 60s. They're still going to use black and white, even though color is available. And it's going to be a story about alcoholism and codependency and gambling addictions and domestic abuse, stuff of that nature, versus here's a money and the frivolities and excess of the 80s that stars a young Tom Cruise. And you're still going to get a little bit about that stuff, but it's going to just be sexier. And you're going to have Scorsese behind the camera. I'm pretty sure 9 times out of 10, that Gen Zer is going to pick The Color of Money and run with it. With that said, I actually prefer The Hustler. I think these are both terrific films, to be clear. I personally rank The Color of Money. I think it's a 4.5 out of 5 is what I gave it on my review. And I gave The Hustler a 5 out of 5. So to me, they're very close to each other. But I think The Hustler is saying more and doing more, especially in those final 15 minutes with its character development and deconstruction, that makes it a more gripping and interesting movie. But the context in which that story takes place and the surrounding actions, particularly as it pertains to Piper Laurie's character and what ultimately happens to her, I don't know if modern audiences would appreciate that and think it holds up as well.
Okay, yeah. Chad, how about you? Had you seen The Hustler before?
I hadn't, and I'm going to continue to protest putting these types of movies in top sports movies This is even less of a sports movie than your beloved Breaking Away
I
being
love
in
that
the top
movie.
10. No,
Breaking
that
Away
shouldn't
is
be in.
so good.
Oh no, I'm outnumbered. It's not a sports movie. But yeah, so this is my first time. I agree with Heath as far as like we don't have these pool hall environments with high stake games going on anymore. Like we have tracks, we have casinos, UFC, a bunch of different venues now that support the type of gambling that really is exclusive to this time of they had maybe the horse track, dog track, and here in the pool hall. And so there's some of that. You don't have these larger than life characters with a city name and character trait. So Minnesota Fats. That's
What a
a
great name.
that's a funny name. And there's some controversy. There was a guy called New York Fats who changed his name to Minnesota Fats. Was it styled after that guy? And the answer was no. These are independent Minnesota Fats. So this is a thing going on in the 60s. So there's a lot of that that's just time capsule. But I think the overall message is pretty timeless. There's narcissism, ego, codependency, like he touched on, alcoholism, and the hubris of youth. So there's a lot here that's still relevant to our times, but there's certainly things that happen. Just like that's the 60s, sure.
To your point, I think if you maybe made this movie now, it might just be poker
Yeah.
Yeah.
instead.
So you're making Rounders.
I think this is looking to do more than Rounders did, but yeah, I think it's a poker movie if you do it today. But I mean, because this movie is not about the pool as much. I don't want to steal it from you, Chad. Going in for your first time, I don't know if this wasn't what you expected or if you got into a deeper well of dramatic presentation here, but tell us about what this was like for your first time. Did you expect to get this?
Seeing that it was a pool movie, I'm like, what are we going to do with this? Because on the other end of the spectrum, and I was not expecting this in the 1960s, so let's just preface that. There's a famous movie about a dodgeball team. Love dodgeball. Not expecting to get dodgeball in 1960 with Paul Newman. That's not his shtick. So it was more intrigue of how are we going to get 2 hours out of pool and make it intriguing. And I was spellbound. I thought Paul Newman did a great job of keeping me interested. Jackie Gleason, who I know from The Honeymooners, like that's where I know Jackie Gleason from. This was a wild experience seeing him play Minnesota Fats. I don't think I'd ever been intimidated by Jackie Gleason before, but here he's just this larger than life imposing figure. So I was bought in pretty early to just the whole personality and pool hall scene.
As a first-time viewer, do you feel like this holds place? This 1961 movie still demands to be watched?
I think you've got to go into it knowing it's a 1960s movie, so there are going to be some oddball things that aren't going to fit, but it definitely still has high value. It's something that I would recommend to just about anyone. You certainly, again, I don't think I would categorize this as a sports movie. You don't have to be a sports fan. This is far more about the drama than it is about the pool itself.
Mm-hmm. It's fair. I don't know what I was expecting necessarily, but I expected to see the ascent of a young billiard, win the championship, a la so many sports movies. Again, it's on a sports movie countdown. And to your point, Chad, this movie is very much not only about the pool. The pool is happening, but it is really a character study of what's going on. And I think the supporting character, the female role of Sarah in this one, is really interesting as well. She's actually just equally as interesting as Eddie is. And to your point, Minnesota is a great character too. There's not a lot of characters in this movie, but each one of them is so interesting. I didn't necessarily pick up on it on my first viewing, but as I started to sit down and study it, I realized there's a lot of richness, and you can do a character analysis of each one of these characters that are in here, and it's really good. In fact, I think this is well set up for a movie. Oftentimes books have a hard time adapting to film. This one is almost designed for film. You don't have a ton of scene changes. You have a very select set of characters, and the development that it happens within them is really phenomenal. And I found myself wanting to think about where were these characters before and where would they go after, which is perhaps why they were able to make a sequel as they did. And I'll be full disclosure, I've not seen The Color of Money. I'm very interested to go see The Color of Money. Having watched this, though, I want to know what happens next. In fact, this movie leaves you wanting to know what happens next, and it's a shame you would have had to have waited over 20 years to have
I love
gotten...
that conversation you had. You're like, there's also a movie called The Color of Money that has Paul Newman shooting pool. Who knew there were two? As I say, yes, that is the sequel
I
to
didn't know
this
that.
movie.
Yeah, I did not know that. So I'm learning all kinds of stuff on this one. So I had a good time with this one. I will admit this movie socked me in the stomach. I did not see this heavy ending coming. I thought we had gone through the heaviness of the alcoholism and the other parts of this movie, and I thought, all right, we're coming up and we're building back up to a nice triumphant, rebuild. And whoa, on the other side of the spoiler, well, we'll get into this, but this movie does not let you off the hook. You're going to feel some stuff in this movie, and you're not going to leave this one just sitting there going like, Breaking Away, as you just brought up, Chad, is one of the most inspiring, feel good, like heartwarming kind of movies that just sits there and goes like, wow, I just feel so good that I watched this. Well, this is on the same countdown as this movie, and this does not leave you feeling that way. It demands a second viewing, I think. Anytime I get challenged like that the first time, I sometimes have did I enjoy this? And then I go back and I watch it again and I say, no, something's really interesting here. And I'm glad I had a chance last night. I rewatched this one again. Anyway, we will have spoilers that lie ahead, so if you have not seen The Hustler, definitely do. We will be back after these messages.
Welcome to the All 80s Movies Podcast.
I'm Bill.
And I'm Jason. And this is the podcast where we talk about the blockbusters, the flops, and everything in between from one of the freshest decades for movies, the 1980s. So whether you're a brain, a jock, a valley girl, or a Jedi, we've got some 80s classics for you.
Do these movies stand the test of time? Are we discovering something new? Is there an 80s movie we're finally watching for the first time?
Join us each week as we dive into the cinematic nostalgia that inspired and influenced a generation. From the hits to the cult classics, we'll discuss our earliest memories, favorite scenes, fun facts, and our not-so-favorite movie moments too.
It's the All 80s Movies Podcast, now available on all major streaming platforms. Please subscribe and happy listening.
All right, we're back, and this is your final warning. There will be spoilers that lie ahead. Chad, do you want to refresh people's memories for those who haven't seen The Hustler since 1961?
Fast Eddie is a pool shark traveling from town to town, hustling people for money. On arriving in New York City, Eddie challenges Minnesota Fats at a price of $200 a game. They play for 25 hours straight, and Eddie's ahead over $18,000, but arrogantly loses it all in a final bet. Fats declares the game over. Eddie meets a troubled alcoholic named Sarah Packard, and they begin a relationship. Eddie joins a poker game and finds Bert Gordon, a professional gambler who he last met while playing Minnesota Fats. Bert calls Eddie a born loser, but offers Eddie a deal. He'll sponsor Eddie, but he wants 75% of the winning. Eddie initially refuses, but after having his thumbs broken during a hustle, he agrees to the term. Eddie loses in 3 cushion billiards, and Bert nearly ends the contract before Sarah intervenes on his behalf. Sarah is coerced into sleeping with Bert and then commits suicide. Eddie challenges Fats again and finally beats the man so badly that Fats is forced to quit. Eddie refuses to pay Bert any of his winnings and says he'll kill Bert if Bert dares come after him. Bert orders Eddie to never walk into a pool hall again. That's the sad ending of our movie.
Yeah, it's a heavy one. I was expecting a more gangster type movie where he gets his arms broken and stuff like that, and I was expecting this kind of movie, but we got something really, really different here. Heath, talk about the way we meet Eddie and the transformation that Eddie takes during this movie.
It is interesting because by the time we are broken into this film, you get the feeling and the sense, and it's even spelled out in some of the dialogue, though not directly, that Eddie's already been on the road hustling for years. He's already refined his craft. We're not seeing him develop his skill set. That's already happened. That was off screen beforehand. Instead, we are essentially starting the movie at the quote unquote championship. There's a best in the world. His name is Minnesota Fats. Everyone knows it. They know where to find him. And if you dare challenge him, you can go there and do it, but you're probably going to lose it all. And that's where the film starts, is Eddie challenging Fats. So you get the impression that he's developed He's got the swagger, he's got the ambition, and he's got the skills to challenge Fats. And we start at the championship. And I think what's interesting is you could make an argument that the movie could have ended right there because, as was denoted by Chad in the summary, he's up 18 grand. All he has to do is walk away. It's over. He has to walk away. Now, there is an interesting dynamic in which he says the game's only over when Fats says it's over. Essentially, he wants to push Fats so hard that Fats concedes that, okay, kid, you are better than me. I don't want to even keep playing you because I'm going to lose. But because Fats never concedes, he gives the impression to the audience that he knows deep down, I can still break this kid. He's a wild stallion, but I can tame him. And he knows that he has him just in endurance. I can outlast this kid until he starts making mistakes. He reads him like a book, and very noticeably, he has the backing of George C. Scott's Burt Gordon behind him the whole time. And you can tell he's just pushing him to keep going. I'm going to break this kid. Because to Burt, it's all a money game. It's all numbers. He doesn't even care about the human cost or capital along the way. But it's that entry point of he's already fighting for the championship and he loses the championship, again, quote unquote championship, right from essentially the opening 25 minutes of the film. We see the fallout of that defeat. That's the real movie, and that's the real character growth. Or actually, growth is probably not the right word in this exchange in this film. It's probably spiral is probably the more apt description. I think that's what makes this movie so fascinating, is because any other film would have taken it the other way. 9 out of 10 films say we're going to watch the star rise up and fight the championship in the end. That's literally the formula of sports movies. That's what you do.
Yeah.
So to subvert expectations, to have our guy lose big in the quote unquote championship match right away and force him to rediscover himself the whole movie, that's what makes this film so special. Because even to this day, it's been over 60 years since this movie came out. I can't think of another sports movie that's really done that arc, at least not off the top of my head. There might be one. I can't think of it. And I think that's what makes this so captivating and so interesting. And especially because, Russell, as you had indicated, you almost think as an audience, especially if it's your first time viewing it, he feels like he does get over that hump at one point. And it's like, okay, now he's ready. And then the movie takes another dark turn, and it's even more twisted and dark than the first loss that sent him down that spiral in the first place. And what makes it so gripping is how he can turn that into actual motivation and inspiration to accomplish the goal he couldn't do at the beginning of the film.
Yeah, but at what cost?
Yes, very true.
Chad, Heath put it so well. Eddie is spiraling after this really exciting matchup with Fats early in the movie. He meets Sarah. Their dynamic, you could say, is the backbone of this movie in some ways. Like, it's through Sarah that Eddie's story is advanced through this, and his transformation is taken. Talk about the two of them.
I just look at this as a very unhealthy relationship.
The textbook definition of unhealthy.
Yeah, neither one is good for the other. They're so caught up in their own issues and their own problems that they can never really. There's a connection. Like, there's an obvious connection. Sarah obviously cares for Eddie, and she intervenes on his behalf, even to the point of going to Burt. And Eddie obviously cares for Sarah, but because they're so self-absorbed too in their own issues, they can never really help pull each other out of their own issues. And it takes Sarah's death as a catalyst. And what an awful death. You and I talked about it off screen, where you're like, I didn't really understand the context of this. There's thought that Burt potentially even raped her. There's discussion to be had there. But even if he didn't, like, she's just succumbed to misery and despair. And it takes her death for Eddie to say, I loved her, I cared about her. I've got to do this for more than just my ego, for more than a title. I'm going to do this now for a life that's can never be returned. So their relationship it's very, very interesting. And it's tough because We've had this conversation many times, Russell. It's not a happy relationship. I know that affects you. When there's no happiness, there's no pot of gold at the end of this rainbow. It's still, the movie ends. It's like in memory of Sarah who killed herself. And now Eddie can't play the game he
I was
loves.
gonna say, and Eddie can't play either.
Right.
It didn't take him up to make him the Michael Jordan pool. He has to walk away at the same
Right.
time. That makes her death less meaningful in some ways.
Yeah. I think it set him free, but yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think he developed and he found character, but again, at great cost. I think I was texting you ahead of time earlier when I first watched it, and I said, "Man, does this movie work if Sarah just leaves him and says, 'I'm done with you'?" You know, that night at the rich guy's house when they're playing not bumper pool or
The 3-cushion pool.
yeah, 3-cushion pool. Yeah, thank you. When they're playing there, and she's like, "Come home with me," and I really did not get the full weight of the "it's me or this game" in this moment, but upon further review, that's definitely what's happening there, and yet he chooses the game. I think in doing so, the full motion of I've lost Sarah by staying here and continuing to play because I believe in myself at this point is pretty powerful. If Sarah is literally just exits the movie at that point, can this movie still work, Heath?
I think it still works. I don't think it's as good. And that is a distinction. I think the movie still works and you can have him finding victory. But at that point, that's a cheerful victory. And then you get to say, he was always the champ. And at that point, it just becomes any other sports movie. It becomes any other traditional kind of story down that avenue. And I don't think that's clearly what they wanted to tell here. I haven't read the original novel that this is based on, but I'm assuming if this is adapted faithfully from the source material, then, that's not what the original author had his intention on. Because I think the loss of Sarah that triggers the true cold ending of this story, that's what allows Fast Eddie to see himself for his own actions and who he is. There's a really great dichotomy in this film between Sarah and Eddie, where Eddie lacks self-awareness, and that is Sarah's power. That is what makes Sarah, at least to me, every time I've watched this, it makes her the more interesting character. Because from the get-go, she knows who she is. She's an alcoholic. She's a liar when she's a drunk. She has no place in the world. She survived polio and she's just kind of lucky to be here, but because she's here and she's just surviving, she has nothing to offer anyone. And she kind of understands the game. She's the only one throughout the whole movie who understands everyone is hustling everyone. At all times, there is a con. There is a pusher and a puller. There is someone trying to get an angle. And it's her death that opens his eyes to that circumstance, that lets him see the world that she was seeing.
Mm-hmm.
And if she just bounces from the story, that's not possible because he's still full of himself at that point. I was able to pull myself up. I was able to win the billiards game without her. And now I can go on and take on Minnesota Fats and it's going to be fine. It's him seeing that she essentially sacrificed herself on the altar of his happiness by going to Bert like she did and everything that happened there, that allows him to be like, this was never worth it. And Bert was playing me the whole time. And just as you'll see at the ending scene where you really come to terms and realize that Bert is also playing Minnesota Fats, when Minnesota is saying, "Hey kid, just pay him the money," it becomes very evident, at least to me at that moment, that Minnesota is still working for Bert, and that's why Minnesota can never leave. It's because he probably still has a sponsorship deal with Bert himself, where he has to fork over a large percentage of the money so that he can have the stakes to keep playing. And you realize everyone's being hustled by everyone, and Sarah was actually, despite her alcoholism, despite her being a liar, was the most honest and genuine person there. And so seeing her fall when it wasn't even her fault to fall, I don't think Eddie gets that true destination, that end game result without that. It's a different character if that doesn't happen.
I think you might be changing in this conversation a little bit how I view certain things, and I love that when we do that on this show. I remember Ebert, I think, said The Hustler is one of the few American movies where the hero wins by surrendering, by accepting reality as it is, instead of aspiring to his dreams. And like you said, Heath, this is the 1 out of 10 movie or the 1 out of 50 movie, and it breaks the mold of the Rocky mold that sets the standard for what a sports movie is. That's a very interesting thought there, because without that, if having just lost her romantically, it's not powerful enough for her to get through to him. This is this entire world that you're in. You're not just choosing the world over love.
It's more than a game.
Yes.
And she's the only one that sees that. And if she just walks away, he's just like, okay, well, I'll find another game to play.
Yeah.
And the game in that context being another woman that he wants to womanize and find, because he's never giving up Pool at that point. There's no incentive for him to do so. Her death, as arguably the true hero of the story, her death opens his eyes to the complexities and dangers of that world as at large, and has to force him to walk away, making him de facto the actual hero.
Mm-hmm. And that's the perverted, twisted, crippled that she writes on the mirror.
Yep.
That's her description of this world. It's a shame because he just generally loves the game, and that it comes with all this other stuff that he didn't necessarily bargain for, to your point, but he truly loves the game. He talks about that at one point with her. So I'm sad. There's part of me that's sad that this thing that he's very passionate about, not the world that comes with it, but the game itself is kind of taken from him, which is why I'm so interested to see what happens in The Color of Money.
Did you ever see Top Gun Maverick?
No.
Okay.
I really don't enjoy Top Gun as much as everybody else in the entire world does. I just was not compelled to see it. I just never felt. I did not. After 20 years, I wasn't like, I gotta see this. I was like, I might see Maverick, it someday.
But it does wind up being a lot of older guy who's been in the game suddenly finds himself able to mentor a newer generation.
Mm-hmm.
But even that, I would say, that is the elevator pitch, and it will still take turns and twists that you're not expecting.
Absolutely.
Not so much as the Hustler. I think the Hustler subverts expectations significantly more than The Color of Money, but The Color of Money still takes some fun turns.
I really like it when Sarah tells him that you're not a loser, Eddie. There's a lot of people that don't have the passion about anything in the whole world that you do about pool. He goes on a long soliloquy about it, how he feels when he's playing. That was really cool. She liked that about him, and she respected that. And as you pointed out, she's still able to see through that. Now, Chad, you love a good villain in a movie. Bert was nominated for the greatest villains of all time. He's a pretty bad dude in the end on this one. He doesn't make the list, but is this a good villain for you?
Absolutely. And I feel like the movie sets us up in the beginning of Minnesota Fats is going to be our antagonist, and he's going to be our bad guy. And Jackie Gleason is big and intimidating, but he's a gentleman throughout. Like, he is just behaving.
He's honorable.
Yeah. He's this honorable giant. And it's this weasel behind him that is running and scheming this entire time. So yeah, George C. Scott is masterful in this role, and Bert is a despicable human being. We don't even have to know what happened between him and Sarah. We just know that Sarah reached a breaking point and she couldn't continue in this world anymore. It doesn't necessarily matter in the debate what happened. And what I think is really interesting is when he whispers in Sarah's ear, and they went to Piper Laurie, they're like, what did George C. Scott actually say? What did he say in that scene? And she goes, I don't know. It was really faint. I couldn't hear. And they went and asked George C. Scott, what did you say to Piper Laurie in that scene to get her to react? And he goes, I never really said anything. I figured anything I said would not be as powerful as what your imagination could think I was saying to her character. So it's just stunning the understanding he had to just be this terrible scumbag. And I love it. I absolutely deserving. We didn't talk about it, but he refused his Oscar nomination. There was some politics going on that he refused his nomination, but it was well deserved.
Yeah, he refused his nomination for Best Supporting Actor because he didn't believe actors should be competing against each other unless they were playing the exact same role in the same performance, almost like, who was the better Romeo in Romeo and Juliet, which, again, in movies, they don't do that. This isn't like a stage play performance thing, so I'm not sure I quite see his perspective as reasonable, but he doesn't like that. And I know Piper Laurie actually didn't feel particularly fault with her nomination for Best Actress either. She didn't even go to the award show. She didn't think she was going to win, and she didn't really put much thought into who wins these award shows and stuff like that, which I guess is it's an incredibly secure way of thinking about it, if you will. Like, I mean, it's only about the acting to them. To their credit, Best Supporting Actor still goes to West Side Story, George Takardis. It's essentially rewarding a good actor for a long-standing feud, though. Ultimately, Scott, though, was rejected at the Oscars in 1970 for his performance in Patton because he stood them up before. So, like you said, Chad, this ends up as a knockdown, drag-out battle, I guess, between the Oscars and George C. Scott. So, good actor. He and awards don't get along, as it is. So, yeah, I wasn't really familiar with George C. Scott, but he held his own. And I mean, Paul Newman's amazing in this movie, isn't he, Heath?
Yeah, I'll just be blunt. Paul Newman is one of my favorites of all time. I think he's absolutely tremendous. What he's doing here is obviously personal preference. Movie is art and art is subjective, but to me, this is some of the best stuff he's ever done. Again, I go to that final 15 minutes where you can just see the expression on his face where he's fighting through so much anger and pain, but he almost hates himself because of it. He's disgusted to even be in Bert's presence. He doesn't want to be there, but he has to prove that Sarah's death was worth it. It's not even about him at that point, but he's just so full of vitriol and hate that he can't stop himself. Like, he keeps championing, you should bet on me, Bert. I can't lose. I can't lose tonight. It's not going to happen. And it's almost like a disturbing anthem that he can't even fathom leaving this room and leaving this competition until Bert gets the point, until Fats falls to the ground, whichever comes first, or both, preferably. He's so driven in that instance. And there are very few performers who can evoke that kind of self-loathing, but with so much passion and purpose behind it, like he can. And that's just, again, the final 10 to 15 minutes of this movie, let alone every other fantastic thing he's doing, whether he's being suave and debonair and he's got smolder to him, or he's being comedic and lighthearted when he's trying to be the cocky, brash young kid who can challenge the world. Even when he gets mad once we see him in a pool hall before he gets his thumbs broken, which we assume are probably goons of Bert's who did that deed for him. He's playing pool and he sees another kid, a cocky young kid who reminds him of himself, and he so very much hates looking in the mirror and seeing this younger version of himself that he's just adamant, I'm going to beat the snot out of this kid. I'm not even going to try to, hustle him for more money. I'm just going to take him for everything right now. And because he's so aggressive about it, that got on Bert's radar, and Bert got guys over there and they broke his thumb. So it's just, I think everything Newman here is accomplishing is beyond exceptional.
And it's interesting you mentioned that because the editor of this, D.D. Allen, they cut this huge scene in this movie. I'm very interested if it's ever been found or if it's available in like a director's cut. They said Paul Newman gives this impassioned speech in the pool hall that it was the best of his entire performance, and they threw it out. And Newman's bitter about this. He thinks it cost him an Academy Award nomination. So I'm really interested to hear this speech because, to your point, he's great. He's great in this. We've covered him, and we had The Sting a couple years back. That was great.
The Sting was great, and I like The Sting maybe better as a full movie, but I have to say this movie is Paul Newman's more than that movie is, because Redford's so prominent in there, and then you've got Robert Shaw. I mean, there's a lot of greatness that's going into The Sting. As far as Newman performance, I thought this was superior for his performance here. I was really impressed by Newman here. He does undergo a great transformation. The cocky guy who just loses control. He drinks too much. He lets the game get away from him and flounders it. And like you said, the spiral, that's another distinct acting turn. We didn't necessarily see this character going this direction. And by the end, he's grown, but he's also lost. He has guilt. He has regret. He has also gained maturity. So many things are going on. That's a complicated set of things to go through. And he's doing it all so well. And he's charismatic, so even as he's spiraling, he's destroying himself, you don't necessarily want to push against him. That's a hard thing to do, to watch somebody make a bunch of bad choices, and yet you're still with him, aren't you?
But doesn't it seem like this character is sort of, so reading some of the stories about Paul Newman during this, it almost seems like he's playing a much more extreme version of himself, because he didn't play pool at all. And he learned to play pool for this movie. But Jackie Gleason was apparently an amazing pool player. Paul Newman gets full of himself, just like Fast Eddie, and he challenges Jackie Gleason to a pool match. It was only for $50, but he breaks and Jackie Gleason cleans up. Doesn't allow him another shot, just cleans the entire table. And Newman gets mad and pays him in 5,000 pennies. Just sheer pettiness, but the arrogance to go against Jackie Gleason, who was well known for being good, and he's like, I just learned and I practiced for 4 hours a day. I'm gonna beat you. And you see a little bit of the character here, and just Paul Newman's own personality and the spitefulness of going to the bank and getting 5,000 pennies and dumping them on Jackie Gleason.
Even when it comes down to how he plays pool, the physical mannerisms in which he uses to like drive the pool cue like a jackhammer across the table, like you can see the accuracy and passion in his shots. You can see like the determination in his eyes. He's just astounding. To your point as well, Chad, about Jackie Gleason, and you mentioned it earlier, I would bet most people know him from The Honeymooners. If not The Honeymooners, what? Smokey and the Bandit, maybe? Like, he's a comedic actor in most people's eyes. In fact, I would even go one step farther to say, depending on how old you are, you might only know him as a reference in Back to the Future. Hey, we can watch Jackie Gleason while we eat. What's a rerun? You know, like, there's a subset of people, depending on their age, that's probably the only time they have even heard that name, Jackie Gleason. But here he is, a comedic talent, comedic gem, giving a completely straight performance that is very subtle and nuanced. He almost never shows any direction in which he's leaning in terms of his attachment to the narrative or plot and other characters and their relationship, except for, like I said, in those final moments where you can see he's just as subtly as he can just pay him the money because he doesn't want to see Fast Eddie get hurt, because he knows Fast Eddie's a real talent, and he can't stand to see like his fellow comrade in pool get struck down. And you could see that Bert is just twisting the knife behind him. But outside of that exchange, Gleason is a wall almost the whole movie. Completely clean face, void of emotion, the definition of a killer. Nowadays, you said earlier, Russell, this would be a poker movie. He's got the poker face. He shows nothing. You don't know his cards. You have no idea where he's leaning. And I want to commend him because he's also probably only in the movie for about 15 minutes.
Yeah,
maybe
20
minutes in total.
20
between
minutes,
the first act and the third act. And he's outstanding.
He really is. I like Gleason as a comedic actor. Loved him and Smoking the Band. Thank you for bringing that one up. We covered that one, and he's great in that one. But I like Jackie Gleason even more. I didn't know he had this in him, and I really liked it. And he and Newman, this is real pool from them, and it's good. Like this is good pool action. In fact, this is a long movie. It's hard to put more in there, but I wish we had gotten more pool action because it was drawing me into the world. I don't crave to watch pool on ESPN, but how it was being presented here was really interesting.
I will say, if you want to see more pool, you will like The Color of Money, because Scorsese does not skimp on actually showing pool.
Okay, that's possibly a good thing. I mean, this movie is long, but I mean, I just said I was having a lot of fun watching Fats play Eddie. I wanted to see Fats destroy somebody else before Eddie got up there, maybe, or something like that. And, I wanted to see him kill somebody else. But Willie Mosconi was a pool expert that they brought in to advise all this, and that authenticity and that hard work. Newman cleared out his dining room, put a pool table in there, and while he hadn't been a pool player, he certainly passed as one to me, because there are not a lot of cutscenes where they just show the hands hitting the ball or the reaction in cutaways. There are a lot of them where they're actually making them. And I think when we covered Coach Carter, I think they put a lot of effort in to make sure their actors could do things and they didn't have to do the cutaway shots. And this movie doesn't do that if you pay attention to that. There are a couple of difficult shots where Willie Mosconi does them himself, but for the vast, vast majority of this movie, it's the actors doing it themselves. And that's a lot of hard work from an actor to put that in, to do that. Another story about Newman, though, that I liked, Heath, was that Piper Laurie had worked with him on a movie before, but she didn't have any speaking lines with him, so she had not really engaged with him. And so she was working with him, and she was intimidated by him and his good looks. And he was Paul Newman. And, they had several weeks of rehearsals, and she became friends with him and his wife, Joanne Woodward, at the time. Eventually, she got over that and was able to adapt and to work well with him. But she said that he was really great to work with and to be around. Paul Newman, to your point, Chad, seems like a very fun person to make a movie with. We covered some of the stuff on The Sting with him. He seems funny and really good at what he does, and seems like a fun guy to have made a movie with. Awesome, but also enjoyable to work with. That's a nice combination. You don't have to have it, but it's cool when the actor doesn't make everybody around them miserable or they're a huge diva. I like that. And it seems like Newman has that.
The Keanu Reeves of the 1960s.
Where he's a lot better than Keanu Reeves.
A better actor, but everyone loves working with Keanu.
That's fair. Yeah. It's interesting. Piper, I did not know her as anybody but Carrie's mom.
Right.
And
yeah. I think
she showed up and I'm like, I immediately don't trust you. Nope.
No, they're all gonna laugh at you. I kind of wanted her to yell at him and tell him, no, they're all gonna laugh at you. Don't play pool again. So
in a Southern accent.
So she got an Oscar nomination for that too. So I didn't realize that. She deserves it in Carrie. I just didn't think of a scary movie getting Oscar nominated. So she's a pretty awesome actress.
We used to nominate horror movies for things, and other than Get Out, we just don't do it anymore, and we need to go back to it. I don't like Hereditary, but Toni Collette absolutely deserved
nominated.
it.
She is an interesting situation where she didn't get the roles that she wanted, so she kind of more of a career path in theater.
Yeah, she goes away for a decade.
Yeah. So she's not getting the roles that she wants, so she changes the game and the form and the medium that she's playing in, because she has great dramatic talents. And she had a hard time breaking out into this role, but she made it here. And to your point, Chad, she has a ton of integrity as an actress. She's awesome at what she does. And I gotta say, I don't know how people just didn't see it. Because after seeing this movie and connecting the dots with Carrie, I'm sitting there going man, I just want to put her in a ton of roles now because she's really good.
Yeah, from her interview, she seemed really aloof, though. She's yes, this was the job. I was around people, but I didn't really talk to them. Yeah, she had nice things to say about Paul Newman, but she just seems very, this is a job. I'm going to show up, do my thing, and then I'm just going to go and be by myself and kind of be a little bit of a recluse. So maybe it's just she's not part of the Hollywood clique and it's not working that way.
Maybe. Now, Heath, you mentioned before Scorsese's what drew you into this world of this character of Fast Eddie. How is Robert Rossen with the character and the guidance in your mind?
Before we get to Robert Rossen, there's one other acting thing that I wanted to mention as a fun little cameo. We'll keep on the Scorsese connection.
Jake LaMotta.
A Mr. Jake LaMotta, the Raging Bull himself, has a cameo at the beginning of this movie where he's a bartender and Fast Eddie hustles him for some money on a trick shot. And I think that's hilarious that he is in this. He has no reason to be here. He does a fine job. He's completely serviceable. But I don't know why he needed to be in this movie. But I'm glad he is. If anything, just for the later Scorsese connection into Raging Bull, I think that's hilarious.
Yeah, he nailed his check
Yep.
line. So, yeah, that was a strange inclusion.
I do think Rosen is, and again, it's just a difference of styles. Scorsese has more flair, especially more panache behind the camera with some of his framing devices and camera movement. Whereas Rosen is much more reserved. He lets the actors take the reins for him. I noticed a lot of fixed camera, and just what I really appreciated the most is just patience and just letting scenes develop. I don't know who the editor was for this off the top of my head. I could look it up. Let's
D.D. Allen.
D.D. Allen. A lot of patience with this, even down to the editing. Very few cuts, letting scenes breathe and characters emote, especially if they're having longer conversations between each other. I noticed it the most in particular when Eddie and Sarah would be talking to each other in their apartment. I thought it made scenes feel more grounded and you could feel the weight of their conversations more. And when they did pick up the editing and things did get more kinetic, I thought that that also worked really well. The montage at the beginning where we just see time ticking by on the clock and hour after hour goes by as Fats and Fast Eddie are clocking in and they're like, oh, it's been, you're up 10 grand and it's been, 16 hours up. It's 18 grand now, 25 hours. And but you feel the weight of that as well. This as almost as if the film is droning on and rhythmic time. And credit to Rosen, credit to Allen for being able to do those things so succinctly, to give us those moments of high intensity in the billiards matches, to give us that sense of time and expression when a match is going long or something is happening that feels like there's a lot of weight to it emotionally in a conversation, giving it the room to breathe. I just very, very well done job overall.
Do have to question some of his casting decisions. I agree with everything you said about his scene setting. And I don't even know what this means, but this was one of the factoids while studying this movie. It said he hired real street thugs and enrolled them in the Screen Actors Guild so they could be used as extras. Maybe this is the 1960s where you can just go out and find street thugs. I don't know where to find them. But well, why not just, this is the Armageddon problem. Why not have actors and train them to be street thugs rather than find street thugs and train them to be actors? What a strange little factoid.
That would just make too much sense.
Well, Robert Rossen was a pool hustler himself in his youth, so there's the love of the game and that authenticity that we mentioned, I think, has to come through on this one. I don't think people understood that having the actors do it for themselves was something that was fully valued. Certainly not at this point. Certainly, it's a mistake that many movies made even well after this movie. So when this movie does get on that top 10 list, Chad, for best sports movies, it does deliver the sports element of it well. It handles that well, and I think that's out of his love for it. He unsuccessfully tried to take a screenplay called Corner Pocket forward and never got that going. But I mean, that love of pool for Rosen isn't here. And I liked when I read, he said, for his words on what this movie is, he said, "Thus there's fundamentally a story of what it means to be a human being, couched within the context of winning and losing." Described the film, Robert Rosen said that my protagonist, Fast Eddie, wants to become a great pool player, but the film's really about the obstacles that he encounters in attempting to fulfill himself as a human being. He attains self-awareness only after a terrible personal tragedy he has caused, and then he wins the pool game from that. It was one of those moments, again, like you said, Heath, that I'm not sure this movie does work anymore without Sarah. I'll be honest with you, I'll have to figure it out. I might change one thing entering this episode was I just wanted her to walk away. I thought it was too much for her to die, but in this conversation, I'm starting to absorb more through talking to you, and I'm starting to respect that move a lot more.
Every subsequent time I've rewatched this, and again, we all come away with our different viewpoints and perspectives, but I find her journey to be the central through line of this film. I imagine the film, although we largely get it from Fast Eddie's perspective, her story is, I think, the most compelling, and seeing the course of these events through her eyes is what makes it that much more tragic and dynamic. and therefore interesting as a viewing experience.
I will say, and this is not D.D. Allen's fault, this is not Rossen's fault in the director's chair. I feel like I'm confused with some of what is happening between Bert and Sarah. I actually like that we don't know what he says to her in the party and she slaps a drink in his face. I like that. The Hays Code is still in play until 1968. And granted, it is not as stringently enforced here at this point. It's working its way towards being antiquated and phased out. However, there's no way they can show an intimate scene. I don't want dragon tattoo level sadism. I don't want that. But I was confused. Did she just drink too much and accidentally need to go get her stomach pumped and she didn't and she just died of alcohol poisoning? What is this cause of death? Did she take a bunch of pills? Did she willingly go in there and sleep with him, which I think is what happened, and her guilt out of that is what led her to die? But I'll be honest with you, so much of this stuff has to happen off screen. This is ugly, heavy stuff, 100% not code passing for the Hays Code at the time, but I found myself leaving myself to fill in some blanks and stuff like that, and call me an undereducated viewer, but I needed some of that spelled out for me, just a hair better. And maybe, Heath, you've seen this enough times where you've picked up on the subtleties, because in 1961 we must read between lines, and I'm dense, I suppose.
I don't know if there is a definitive answer, because we do have to read between the lines and fill in the blanks ourselves. I think it is kind of just left up to our interpretation. My interpretation, for whatever weight that's worth, not much, but still, is that something that he whispered essentially spelled out, it's either you or me, and I will make sure it's you. Again, maybe not those exact words, but you're the disposable one here. He is my golden goose. I'm taking him. Because again, human cost is irrelevant to Bert. He does not care. He is there for the win. He is there for the money. And she makes a one last ditch effort to save him being Eddie. Eddie rebuffs her to stay and play the game longer. And so now she's completely defeated. And the way I took it was because, again, Bert's a selfish SOB. He's in it just for his own passions, regardless of who he hurts. I think he also was lustful. That is slightly hinted at in a couple moments. And I think he just wanted to get with her. And he probably played up that dynamic of, hey, I know you want to save your boy. Here's what I do. If you sleep with me, I'll make sure I'll keep bankrolling him, even when he has nights like tonight where he loses me $3,000. And I think a combination of that with maybe alcohol that was clearly already in her system. I think she was already drunk at that point, and him just being a horrible human being taking advantage of her, whether it was rape, that's what it appeared to be for me. But some kind of action was taken in which Bert got his way physically with her the way he wanted, probably with some BS promise to her of, oh, I'll take care of him now and I'll make sure that he's okay. While she may have, I wouldn't say felt good about herself by any stretch, but at least been okay, at least Eddie's going to be taken care of. At that moment, yeah, she couldn't live with herself anymore. And whether it was pills or she drowned herself in the tub or however it happened, I don't even think that's relevant. The fact of the matter is she just took her own life. That's all we really need to know in that moment. That's what I've always indicated is the outline there being Bert says it's either you or me, and it's going to be me. I don't lose. And then a secondary, I will take care of your boy if you get out and give me what I want, which in that case was her body. And a combination of those factors, she ended up taking her own life because there was nothing to live for anymore. The one guy she loved, she couldn't have, and she hated what had happened to her in this world and what she had become and what had become of her and the people that were taking advantage of her, even Eddie to a degree. Not even to a degree, blatantly taking advantage of her, robbing money out of her own purse and stuff like that to keep the game going. There is no incentive for her to live at that point, so she ended it.
I completely agree. And Russell and I had an offline conversation when he had first watched this movie, and we both had very different interpretations of the scene. And I landed pretty firmly. I think where you're saying, Heath, is Bert coerced, and I would go as far as she was likely drunk and therefore raped her. and then she commits suicide. I don't think it was an accident. I think, especially with that powerful mirror scene, she's spelling out the world as she sees it and the world that she no longer wants to participate in.
Yep.
She's just seen all the ugliness and she's done. And that's her way out. And it's a depressing fact of the movie. And it was interesting talking to Russell as we're going back and forth. It's like, I didn't see this. We kind of had this conversation for happier subject with Spirited Away, of like what we need spelled out and what we don't. That was our last episode. But here,
Spirited Away is another great flick.
it is. It's I can't recommend it enough. Please watch it, everybody. but yeah, I think the 60s, you had to be, to your point, Russell, with the Hays Code. You can't come out and just say, this is what happened. Maybe the book is far more explicit about it.
Yeah.
Probably.
And I'll even go so far as to say, who knows who edits Wikipedia, but the Wikipedia entry, very briefly in one sentence, covers this section by saying, Eddie collects his $3,000 share and decides to walk back to the hotel where he discovers that Sarah has committed suicide because of Bert's sadism. Again, it's just a Wikipedia entry. I don't know who edits that, but like you guys said, because of the Hays Code, what could or couldn't be shown, I think that's about as clear of an answer as we could possibly get there.
We've talked about what has aged well and what has not aged well. Just personally, I am not Mr. Like I said, spell out a rape scene. I don't really like that in a movie either, but I just would like a little more clarity. I think understanding the road to a heavy suicide death is, I guess I want some kind of understanding what that character. I'm really invested in Sarah's character, to what you both are saying. So lack of full clarity for me kind of got to me there.
And again, I want to reiterate, Eddie's not a good person either. He steals money from her out of her purse. There's a scene earlier in the movie where he physically assaults her and beats her. Like,
he's not nice to his manager who got him there either, by the way. We haven't really talked about Charlie is his name, right?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Charlie Burns was the character's name.
I mean, he's in the middle of his spiral, and part of his spiral is he turns his back on somebody who he has built a strong rapport for. If you're going to part ways, it wasn't done in a pretty manner either. He cast him aside in a very ugly, destructive, immature way. And it's true, Charlie might have been using Eddie, but he also cared about Eddie. I think that much was established in there. And so he was using him, but he certainly cared about him more than Bert ever would. You know, yeah, he did just want to have a pool hall of his own. He was going to get old and retire, and he was going to be done with Eddie before Eddie was done with him. But that didn't seem entirely like when he called him out on it, he wasn't going to lie and cover it up. It's just like, yeah, that's what it is. But I mean, haven't you had fun doing this together? I mean, and
look
furthermore,
at how much money we've made. You know?
Exactly. And Charlie even said, like, I told you to walk away and you didn't listen. I mean, Charlie gave him pretty good advice. Walking away with $18,000 in 1961 in your pockets, really, really good advice.
He even told him to walk away at $10,000. Like, Eddie pushed his luck several times. I think he first says something around $6,000, then $10,000, and then $18,000 is the last time we hear from Charlie. And then at that point, he just kind of shuts up and he's like, okay, I can't stop you, clearly, so you're going to just falter now, and I'm going to have to watch it happen.
Right. And then, again, to Rossen's degree of authenticity, I like where he chooses to film this. Obviously, we're in New York City, but there's actually two defunct pool halls, McGurr's and Ames Billiard Academies. They are both not something you can come visit today, but I mean, they are shot in real pool halls. So this isn't necessarily a bunch of on-set location. In studio creation in 1961. That's not always a given. That, again, is another move by Rossen I liked. I keep coming back to, with Rossen, he ensured authenticity with this movie.
One little thing, because you just made me think about it when you said 18,000 in 1961. I just did a little inflation calculator. That is a whopping $189,000 in today's 2024 money. We'll politely round. He was up $200,000 and he didn't walk away. Like, if you were at the casino with a friend and your friend's up $200K and they don't walk away, you're slapping the out of your friend and you're telling them to walk away from the table,
dragging them away.
You are like, no, dude, you are done. You are out. Let's go party the rest of the night. And you go put that in savings. Life's good for you for at least the next month or so. Like bare minimum, depending on how stupid you are with money.
I was gonna say,
But
I would hope it's longer than a month, but okay, yeah, I guess
depending on how stupid someone is with the money. But my point is like when you put it in the context of today's dollars, so we can understand, that is an insane amount of money that he just walked away from. It's
Yeah.
crazy.
Do you guys want to hand out some awards?
Love to.
All right, Heath, who is your MVP of this movie that you clearly love very much here, The Hustler?
This is really hard for me because my MVP, I'm sticking strictly from a story perspective in the interpretation of my answer here, because from an acting perspective, this would be a different answer. But Sarah Packard, Piper Laurie, I think is genuinely the heart and soul of this movie. I've touched on that already. I don't think this movie works without her, and I don't think the dramatic impact of this ending works without her unfortunate and awful demise. Because of that, her character and that performance are the MVP of this film.
Love it. Chad, how about you?
I went with Jackie Gleason, and I think it's just due to my familiarity with his comedic characters, but to be large and threatening and a gentleman and just completely subverting every expectation in every single scene. He's only in it for 20 minutes. The true MVP is Paul Newman, but for me, what kept me coming back was I want to see more of Minnesota Fats. I want to see what happens with this character, and I want to see this final round with him. So Jackie Gleason is my choice.
I love that too. I'm with you, Heath. I did Piper Laurie, Sarah Packard, for all the reasons you did. I want to give a nod to Paul Newman. I think I mentioned this before. I've not seen his full catalog yet, but for me, I think The Verdict might have been my favorite performance from Paul Newman. And I'm not sure this might have surpassed it for me.
I'm a very big, I know it's very late in his career, but I've always thought his small role in Road to Perdition was my favorite of his.
It's good.
But yeah, I think this is right there up there. And again, when it comes to strictly performance, I'd probably say Paul as well. But when you phrase it as MVP, I'm encompassing the performance with the character, and I have to give it to Sarah/Piper.
And I did as well. But I'm with you too. Best supporting actor, which again is limited set of characters, but some good choices still. Heath.
I'm actually going to go George C. Scott here. I think, as the old adage goes, your hero is only as good as his villain, or is defined by their villain, depending on the phrasing. George is incredible here. He is just a real bastard, just an awful human being. And not everyone can play a villain well. There's a real reason why, some people can be a babyface in wrestling, and some people are good enough to be a babyface and a heel. It takes talent to get people to hate you that much, but still give off a convincing and honest performance. And George does that. I think he's really, really good here.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Chad. Best supporting. You and Jackie Gleason for MVP, so you're going in another direction here.
Yeah, he said everything I would say and better. So George C. Scott as Burt Gordon, just incredible.
Well, whether from limited choices or from just great clarity, I'm going to follow your MVP up, though, Chad, for my best supporting and say Jackie Gleason, Minnesota Fats. I was compelled. Like same reason you were saying. Like I didn't see him being able to do this. Every moment he was on screen was either just a joy because I wasn't expecting this, and then I came to really like the character Minnesota Fats as well. I was expecting a gangster type guy with a hot head. Kept expecting him to snap, but he wasn't. And to be cool when you're $200,000 in 2024 money down, and to still come back and say, I'm still in control enough, I can still win this throughout the night. This guy's drinking too much. I mean, flip it around. Like I said, each one of these characters is so interesting. We don't get as much backstory on Minnesota Fats, but I'm fascinated and I want to know how he got to be who he was. So, yeah. And even upon losing, the sheer ride that he took as a pool player, I loved it when he said, "You're a good pool player, Eddie. And I really enjoyed playing with you. I lost a lot of money tonight, but I also had a lot of fun playing you." And that kind of respect, it's just a really enjoyable thing to watch somebody who just enjoys the game that much. Hidden gem does not have to be an actor, but hidden gem Heath.
I think I am going to go with Jake LaMotta here, just because it's just so funny. It is the definition of a hidden gem in a movie like this. He's doing exactly what he was asked to do. It's great seeing his punched up face, and he does a decent job. He's in and out. It's quick. It's humorous if you know who he is and get the reference. And yeah, we'll go with Jake.
Chad, who is your hidden gem? And I'm guessing it's not going to be the goons that you said we should get actor goons for.
I mean, one of the funny ones is Charles Deercop, who is a goon, and he's in The Sting, and he's that's fun. But I went with somebody else from a bigger movie that we've seen, Murray Hamilton. His character's name is Finley. He's the dude behind the cage that's giving them all their setup. But you're gonna recognize him as the mayor in Jaws. So I was happy to see him.
Wow. Yeah. Terrible mayor, by the way.
Absolutely. Yes. We're not going to close the beaches until after the 4th of July.
Yeah. My hidden gem, I mentioned him earlier, Willie Moscone, the American pool player from Philadelphia, who was the technical advisor and stunt double, or if you will, for this movie. So, again, to make it look real, to coach Newman into being competent on screen, it's really impressive. I don't think this movie would be as good with a bunch of cutscenes. Recast. You had to recast somebody and put somebody in their place. Heath, who would it be?
I don't have an answer for who I'd replace it with, but I feel like Myron McCormick as Charlie Burns. I just wanted someone a little bit more grizzled there. I have no other way to define it, and this is not the right actor probably, because I think the age would probably be a bit off, although it probably still work. Give me like a Burgess Meredith, like from Rocky, or something like that. Just a little bit more. I've seen some stuff. I've seen some things. The world is harsh, but I'm going to get you through it, kid. Like a little bit of that gruffness and weariness. I wanted a little bit more there.
I really love it. Chad, who's your recast?
I think I have to duck here because there's been so much praise. I'm recasting Piper Laurie.
Oh.
I think my problem was she's Mrs. White from Carrie, and I could not get that out of my head. And I couldn't get past it. I recognize she's doing a great job. She was recognized by the Academy for it, but I just felt like this is too rough. I need somebody else, a different face here. So I went with Janet Leigh for like a world-weary character.
Okay. I'm following suit with what you had said there. Myron McCormick was my guy, and I also had a little bit of a hard time. I had some guys from earlier in the 40s. I had some thoughts for newer things. I think I could get really in the time period of the 60s. I was thinking about the guy from The Odd Couple. His name's Speed. He's not Wild Nathau or Lemon, but one of the other poker players that's out there with him, the more abrasive one. I thought Larry Haynes might be the right guy for this one. Not a huge filmography, just a movie I really love, and for whatever reason, that's what popped into my head here. So,
fair.
And no, Chad, that's not the worst thing you've said all night long. Not liking Breaking Away. not liking Breaking Away still bothers me to this day.
It's a sports movie.
I still wake up at nighttime going like, how did Fry and Chad not like that movie? I need a do-over.
I mean, if that's a sports movie, Gladiator is the #1 sports movie of all time.
We've done 274 of these episodes, and that's one of my least favorite ones that we've done, just because the movie I love. My dog was kicked on that episode, and it made me so sad. So,
you picked two hosts that hate irritating children, and you picked a very irritating kid.
Anyway,
it's not a good movie, Russell.
Keith, what is your best shot of the movie?
The shot where Piper is painting her suicide note on the mirror with lipstick.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you haven't seen the film before, if you're just watching her do that, you're probably like, oh, this is not going to end well. Like you just know your heart sinks, you go pale, and there's dread in your existence at that moment, because why else would she be doing this? When you start to see it, even down to the words she's writing, she's changing her font style in every word. There's purpose in that dictation and what she's trying to extrapolate from those words and portray as a letter to Eddie, to Bert, to the cops that will see that, and therefore also as well us, the audience. It's beautifully shot, well performed, harrowing scene.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of those moments where I wanted color, by the way. Those words being like, like blood red would be very poignant.
We didn't mention it. Might be apropos to mention it now just because you said that. I'm all fine with movies being black and white since the advent of color, if you're doing something with it, if there's purpose and intent. And I don't know if this, at least for me, this film earned the black and white, other than to show that this is maybe the relic of a bygone era or a passionable hobby that's seeing its way out the door. The idea of the pool hauler running tricks is kind of dying out, maybe, is really the only thing I got from it that would explain why we would want to date the film in black and white. Again, I'm not even saying it looks bad. Cinematography wise, I do think it's beautiful. I think it earned its Oscars that it got. But I don't know if this film justified black and white when you could have gotten moments like that with the blood red lipstick that I think would have been much more poignant and impactful as a viewing experience.
I found myself wanting this one in color, and I rarely say that, but I'm with you, Heath. I think the pool hall scenes and stuff, I wanted color in some of those things.
I would even go so far as to say, and this would even help it as a sports film, because I know, Chad, you were saying this doesn't feel like a sports film to you. You're wrong, but at least to you, it doesn't feel that way. At least in Color of Money, they play 9-ball even more often than they play pool. Here in this one, they play pool more often. But even just in tracking the game, you can't discern the solids and stripes all the time because of it being in black and white. It's really hard to see who's shooting what, and you just kind of have to trust the film that, when they say Bats made a good shot or Eddie just won the game, sure he did. Even though you did he just strike the 8-ball in, or did he strike the 10 in or something? You don't really know. You can't tell. And again, with Color of Money, Scorsese shooting it in color, you get that the action, the pacing of the game itself feels much more vibrant.
I think jumping ahead. You probably found my change one thing for me just now. We stumbled into it. A change.
You're
midway.
welcome.
Yeah, no. Chad, best shot.
It's the same shot, but I'm going to back it up a few steps because we start with Sarah walking out of the bedroom and you see Bert in the background and she closes the door on him before she starts writing. And it's just this one continuous shot. It's an impressive shot to get that full frame mirror, not get any light, not get any reflection other than what she's doing, and to capture her expression, which she just does a great job of looking dead in the eyes. All of that is hard to do. And so the acting performance there, I said I'd recast, but she does a great job here. And I just think it's a beautiful shot and it's so powerful.
I went the same direction that you guys did, but just for variety's sake, because you guys have covered it so well, I'm going to call it to a pool moment when Fats and Eddie both have their cue balls on the table. It's a 1-point perspective. The rack triangle of balls is sitting there, and each cue ball is on it symmetrically on either side. Their faces of the two competitors are facing the screen, and they're lining up to see who's going to break when you hit the ball against the back wall, and how close you get to the closer wall is who gets to break. That shot of the two of them, the two competitors, I don't know, that just felt to me like it's Bird Magic. It's Russell Wilt. All those great rivalry things, and even though it's fictional, the intensity is there. To me, this is where it is a sports movie for me. Of like, this is intense. The two competitors are pulled into frame. That's a good shot.
Yep.
Best scene, Heath.
Again, I have to go to the ending scene. I don't know if this is really one scene. Again, because it's like almost 10 minutes long. It's pretty much the final act, the final game with Bats. But really, from the moment Newman squares up as Fast Eddie, looks George C. Scott in the face and says, "You should bet it all on me because I can't lose." And then he kind of goes on a soliloquy, like a diatribe, where he essentially just verbally assaults Bert for his character, for his actions, for his depravities, for about 4 or 5 minutes straight, while never once breaking that rant, and it still plays a powerful game of pool. Like, His concentration is unparalleled because he is simultaneously playing the best game of pool in his life while not even giving a damn about that game of pool because he just wants to chew Bert out. And he's just as coherent in his words and phraseology when he's chewing Bert out as he is good at playing pool. And that is a level of multitasking that is almost near superhuman, the way it's portrayed there. And I just think that scene and everything it's taking care of, it's challenging its characters with, and it's providing to the audience is just, it's so good. It amps me up because I'm like, yes, you tell him Bert's a son of a bee and I hate him. But at the same time, I'm like, oh, I hate how we got here. And it's like all these emotions wrapped up into one.
Chad, best scene. That was good, Heath.
I like a good montage and the 25-hour duel with Minnesota Fats where we just keep advancing games and we see the money racking up, but we also see the changes in wardrobe and Eddie starts becoming sweaty and disheveled and his shirt's like ripped open and his hair becomes a mess and there's just this bourbon fueled haze going on. Minnesota Fats keeps his entire composure. The most he does is he just removes his blazer jacket, but he still looks completely dapper through this entire thing. And just that contrast of the two styles is fascinating.
It's great. That was mine too. The first showdown between Eddie and Minnesota Fats. And as you pointed out, Heath, I remember first time I paused, as I sometimes do. I wrote in my notes, I don't know where this movie's going to go from here. That was pretty good for early in this movie. So I'm with you, Chad. Best wardrobe or makeup moment, Heath?
Again, kind of hard to tell because it's in black and white, but I feel like I would have really loved to see some of these suits in color, especially if once we got to like the Derby in Kentucky. That could have been some really cool outfits there. It's just hard to tell. But I'm going to go with Fats's suit with the giant flower on his lapel. I don't know, something about it. Chad, you said dapper earlier. I agree. Gleason just looks really great. That suit looks very clean on him. And he looks like a mob boss. He looks like the Kingpin.
Yes.
You know, just his size and stature in that great suit. So we'll go with that.
Yep. Chad, how about you? Best wardrobe or makeup moment?
Going with Minnesota Fats as well. And yeah, I'm thinking of Vincent D'Onofrio in the Daredevil series. He does remind me of the Kingpin, but during that first duel, when he takes off the blazer and he's just got this black vest on, I think it's just a great look for him. And somehow he looks even more intimidating when he's removed that blazer.
You have done a great job of summarizing through your best scene and through this, Chad, of why I'm picking Minnesota Fats' sleek get up. It shows his confidence. It shows that he has money, that he has won, that he is the master. He looks like the boss at the end of the game, so to speak.
Yep.
And the wardrobe reinforces it because he doesn't have to say a lot. He's a subtle performance, and the wardrobe complements it perfectly. I've never talked so much more about changing one thing in an episode before actually getting to this point in the episode, but I've done it today. Heath, what is your change one thing?
My change one thing is not actually what you think it would be. It's not changing it to color. My change one thing is I would add a scene where we see Eddie get a one-up on Bert early on in their dynamic. And the reason why is, again, as we talked about earlier, everyone in some way, shape, or form is conning or hustling everyone. And at some point or another, everyone has a leg up on everyone, except for in one relationship dynamic. And that is Eddie and Bert. Bert always, 100% of the time, is above Eddie. He has the one up on him. He controls him, either monetarily, from a money perspective, or from a gamesmanship perspective, telling him what games he can and cannot play, how long he's going to play. He controls and dominates him. I would have really liked if when Eddie sat down at that poker table about midway through the film, it's his first time really interacting with Bert since seeing him at the beginning of the film. If Eddie wins, and we see Eddie win several hands of that poker game, giving Eddie the false confidence that he can play Bert. Because then I would believe throughout the rest of the movie that Eddie had a plan. Because I don't think that Eddie had a plan. at all. I think Eddie's plan was, well, I guess I'm just going to keep doing this because at least he's bankrolling me. And as he says at one point, which might or might not be my quote, I'll get to, 25% of a big thing is better than 100% of nothing. So that just, it seems juvenile and it seems lesser of Eddie, given how intelligent we'd seen Eddie throughout every other aspect of this film and his character and how calculated he was in all of his decisions. I do not understand why he would just be okay with being Bert's goon in his money-making machine. I really wanted one scene where we could at least see Eddie get something over on Bert, and I think that poker scene was the perfect opportunity, but Bert walks away from the poker table. Because then I could have bought why Eddie would have been down for this, because in the back of his mind, he could have been like, oh, I can turn this on Bert. I've played him before. I can play him again. But from a motivation standpoint as a character, I have never understood why he was so okay with doing Bert's bidding.
Okay, yeah. Chad, are you putting the Newman scene that was cut out by D.D. Allen into this? You mentioned you wanted to see that earlier. What's your...
That's really tempting, but no. For a movie that I honestly think went a little too long, I want to add more length here. And it makes no sense, and I'm just going to be a walking contradiction on this. But I want a little more of Sarah, because I feel like what led her to Bert is a bit abrupt. And then her suicide almost comes, you have to really backtrack. It seemed out of nowhere. And I had to pause the movie and rewind it. And I probably watched the party to the bedroom scene 4 or 5 times before I was really confident of what just happened. And so I'm going to take your side a little bit here, Russell. I need a little bit more filled in the blank. Maybe a scene with Sarah talking to Eddie of like truly emphasizing how desperate she is or how on the edge she is. Because we get an idea that she's not in great shape, but we don't have any idea that she is down to her last chance until the writing on the mirror. And then we just get news off screen of, hey, she's gone. So give me a little more of Sarah, a little bit more of this context to help with that scene.
And that's nothing that could have been done other than had this movie just been made 10 years later.
Yeah,
so,
maybe.
Yeah. Which also, we've talked about making it color as well. Those are the two things for me, as you mentioned. I want more clarity towards the end with Sarah, and I do want this movie to be color. I think this movie would be very, very rich in color. I think like you mentioned, the wealthy aristocrat's mansion and his party would have been a very fun scene to have in color. And some of the street scenes in between the match, I think you could have gotten some more of that city in there. And if this is all in color, night shots in black and white kind of suck at this time period. So getting some of the texture of these pool halls in that world, you can, as a director, visually bring the seediness in that world that Sarah's describing into there. Had this movie been made later, I believe visually the feeling of those underbellies, you could show moments of wealth and seemingly light in it, but then the converse, you through color, through light, through shadow, and through environment and setting. I believe that New York City has all the right elements in it to show the glory and the dark underside of that. So it's a roundabout way of setting. I think color would really, really, really visually reinforce all the themes of this movie even more. That's not a knock on Rossen either, by the way. I just think had this movie been made later, better camera equipment would help.
Yeah.
Best quote. You hinted at this earlier, Heath. Best quote.
Again, 25% slice of something big is better than a 100% slice of nothing. I think it's just pretty solid mantra. It's very much a you miss 100% of the shots you don't take kind of quote. It's the same intent behind it, but it's still a powerful message, and I just like how it's utilized in this film.
Absolutely. That's a very true statement as well. It's hard to argue with. Chad, how about you? Best quote.
I'm going to take some of the monologue of ripping into Bert, but one specific part I really liked is when Fast Eddie says, "You don't know what winning is, Bert. You're a loser because you're dead inside and you can't live unless you make everything else dead around you." And that is just a perfect summation of the character of Bert. He's just sucking the energy and the life out of everything around him for green.
And my best quote is going to come from Eddie and Sarah. And Eddie is talking. He says, he goes on a long diatribe, so I will go towards the end of it because it's more about the response than Eddie's description. But Eddie would say, to feel the roll of those balls, you don't have to look. You just know. You make shots that nobody's ever made before. I can play that game the way nobody has ever played it before. I can play it. And Sarah said, "You're not a loser, Eddie. You're a winner. Some men never get to feel that way about anything." And I really loved it. That was the moment where she totally validated his passion for the game. It's not that his skill was something she wanted to take him away from, as you pointed out, Heath. It's that the world that comes with it is one of exploitation. I might have missed that on my first viewing. I'm really glad I got to watch it last night. I'm really glad that we got to talk about it here because I think I appreciate this movie more in the last 90 minutes of this conversation than I did 90 minutes ago, which is a sign of a really great movie that continues to make you think about the characters in that way. Heath, before we go any further, remind everybody one more time, where can we hear more from you in the Franchise Paradiso podcast?
Yep. You can find us on Spotify or Apple Podcast. Search Franchise Paradiso. We also have a really poorly run Instagram at franchiseparadiso.com. You can find us there. And one of our fans actually just told us this week that they made a subreddit for us. We didn't ask for that, but we got one now. So r/Franchise Paradiso on Reddit. You can go talk about how bad all of our rankings are, whatever you want to do.
Heath, we've come full circle. And on a 5-star scale with half-star intervals, what would you rate The Hustler from 1961?
Repeating what I already gave away the game earlier, I would give this a 5 stars. I think this is a masterpiece. It's terrific.
Well, you're not alone. Just about all the critics of Rotten Tomatoes agree with you. Ebert, everybody agrees with you. So you're not going out on a limb too much there. You're in great company, and you're totally justified. Putting you on the spot, Chad, what do you give this movie?
I gave it 4 stars. I think it's a really engaging story. It definitely made me want to immediately check out The Color of Money. And I think Fast Eddie is just a fascinating character. And I really want a spin-off movie that's never going to happen, but of Minnesota Fats. And then his now struggle with Bert and maybe trying to take inspiration from Eddie and break free. So I want that spin-off that will never happen. I want that alternate timeline. I'm really glad I got to check this out.
The Temperature of Minnesota.
There you go.
Yeah, I don't know. My rating on this is going to be a 4.5. I'm basically between you guys. I wrote down 4, but I think having these conversations with you have made me think about certain things. I did not really like Sarah's death. I thought it was over the top. I thought it was overly melodramatic and was a sour note. And I think I wanted the typical sport movie ending. Until I think Heath and Chad, you guys kind of got me to sit there and say, no, this movie doesn't reach its full impact without that. And Sarah is just as interesting of a character. So thanks for the conversation on that. It's changed the way I view the movie, and I'm definitely going to want to go back and see it again sometime after we've talked about it since then. It's certainly a movie I'd like to share with people.
Do the duology with Color of Money. They're a great back-to-back.
Chad, do you want to help me pick a movie for next time?
Absolutely. Russell, get your sword ready. We have 3 samurai films to choose from. Option number 1, we're going to do Red Shadow, Akakaije from 2001. A love triangle blooms between a team of 3 ninjas before tragedy strikes and forces them to reassess their clan's principle. Option 2 is 13 Assassins from 2010. A group of assassins come together for a suicide mission, kill an evil lord. Or option 3, The Last Samurai from 2003. Talked about Tom Cruise earlier. In 19th century Japan, Nathan Algren, a U.S. Army captain, is hired by the Japanese emperor to train his army in the modern warfare techniques. Captain Algren finds himself trapped in a struggle between 2 eras and 2 worlds. Russell, what are we watching?
We've talked a lot about Tom Cruise tonight with The Color of Money. I'm now in a cruise mood. Let's do The Last Samurai.
Excellent.
I love that movie. It's so good.
All right. Well, thank you, Heath, so much. You were a really fun guest to have on. Made a lot of great points. Really fun to meet you. Fun to meet a friend of a friend, too. So thank you, Andy Van Mater out there, for connecting us through to you. And Heath, thanks for coming on, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, and thank you all the lords, ladies, and knights of the Retro Movie Roundtable. We invite you to reach out to us. We want to hear from you, so subscribe, rate, and review to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Pandora, wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Give us a like on Facebook. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter at @movie_retro. Email us at retromovieroundtable@yahoo.com. Producing and providing this podcast is fun, but not free, so we invite you to support the show at our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/Retro Movie Roundtable. All contributions are much appreciated and will go towards making the show better for you, the listeners. As always, thank you for listening. Be good to each other and watch more movies. Chad?
Too bad Hallmark doesn't make a "Sorry your dodgeball coach got killed by 2 tons of irony" card.